Welcome to Cornell Keynotes. Today we are going to cover and look at the elevated role that advanced analytics is playing in human resources decision making and talent management and overall organizational strategy. So guiding our conversation today is Lisa Sensitz from Cornell's ILR School, who is zooming in from New York. Also joining us are Beth Perrone, who is SVP of Talent, and Jeremy Shapiro, AVP of Workforce Analytics at Merck & Company, a multinational pharmaceutical company that's located and headquartered in Rahway, New Jersey. I'm excited to see where today's conversation will take us, but first, listeners, you are part of this as well. We'd like you to be part of the conversation, so please drop your questions in the chat as they come up, and we'll take them behind the scenes here, and I'll kick them over to Lisa as we go along. Also, heads up for some URLs and information about Cornell's certificate programs in HR analytics, the very thing we're covering today, should you want to level up your skills and expertise in this space to become an in-demand HR strategist. Lisa Sensitz, I want to kick it over to you, and Jeremy and Beth. Thanks for handling today's show.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Jeremy and Beth, for joining us. So let's jump right into it. Jeremy, I'm going to start with you. Tell me about the journey you've been on at Merck, advancing analytics in HR.
Yeah, sure. Happy to, and thanks to both of you for having us on the podcast. I'm Jeremy Shapiro. I get to run this an analytics team inside of Merck. One thing that's interesting to me is when I joined about 6 years ago, and as soon as I joined, I started hearing from people who had been associated with Merck or some of our companies over almost decades that were doing quantitative work inside of HR. So there's actually been some talent inside of HR for a while that's been doing this. And what's fascinating is that in every era, we kind of reinvent ourselves and we think about things a little bit differently, constantly building on each other. And kind of one of my hopes for our conversation here is for anyone that's listening and learning, if you've not been doing this for a long time, there are things that you can learn from us, you kind of leapfrog into those areas, and some things that are, well, actually just things that are free, that asking a question and a better question doesn't cost anything in itself. So today we have an analytics team. So I work for Beth in the talent team, and it's about 25 people. Of that 25, it's kind of divided up into a few groups. One is a very talented group in reporting and insights, and their job is to try to create scalable solutions so that HR business partners, folks inside of the business, our finance colleagues, don't have to ask for data and make it transactional, that they have data at their fingertips and analysis and insights at their fingertips for them to do their work. We also have a consulting group, and the consulting group is so cool. It's just like if you were to hire an outside consulting team, except it's inside, that are a combination of industrial and organizational psychologists, some economics training and business training, and their job is to partner with different parts of our organization and try to understand their business needs and their organizational needs, and then try to essentially leverage analytics and analytical thinking to make better decisions, faster decisions, and really try to help enable capability. And then we have kind of product groups. So employee listening is a product group, as well as a data science team. And that team all around the world, their job is to try to answer the questions that are the hardest ones, right? The ones that you haven't been able to repeat over and over again. And not surprisingly now, we work a lot within our HR AI strategy as well too. So certainly a lot of that aren't things we did 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so, I kind of feel like the number one skill in some of the work that this team does is the skill to learn, right? And can continue to evolve and try to keep pace with all the wonderful ideas and work that the company is doing and HR is working on.
Hey, can I chime in there, Jeremy?
Please, yeah.
Hey, everybody, it's Beth. And Lisa, thanks for having us. Jeremy's not giving himself enough credit. So I just wanted to add a few things here. He talked about the fact that 5-10 years ago we weren't doing some of those things. We've been on this curve, right? Where as I think about 7 years ago or so, we were spending most of our time in that reporting function, right? Providing support to the business or to the HR organization on things like, head count and, where are people sitting and, how many open jobs are there, that kind of thing. Where the function has evolved is when you hear Jeremy talk about things like consulting and some of that research piece. It's really cool stuff, and credit to Jeremy in sort of really evolving that team and bringing people in with very unique skill sets. And I think the biggest thing that I've seen as part of that change or on that curve has been the elevation of HRBP skills, right? So we had HRBPs who would turn to workforce analytics and say, can you help me run a report? And now the conversations that are happening are that consulting arm engaging with HR business partners, asking questions like, what business problem are you trying to solve? And how can we think about that business problem through the lens of data and analytics? And even through the use of technology. I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point. We use a tool called Vizier, but HR business partners are now encouraged to themselves bring data and analytics to the business, and it doesn't require them to necessarily come to Jeremy's team. So we're skilling up that HR business partner community as well, and Jeremy deserves all the credit in that.
I think that's kind. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating too. He's not only hear how you're advancing analytics in HR at Merck, but also how you're helping transfer that knowledge and transfer the learnings that you yourself have to build the capabilities of your HR partners so that they can also very clearly communicate this with the business leaders that they support and really look deeper into the organization. And I do believe that a large part of that is storytelling, right? And helping these individuals be able to communicate the story that the data is telling everyone. So if you could share with us, can you tell us about a time where storytelling may have went well and maybe a time where it didn't go so well?
Yeah, that's cool. That's going to be fun. Okay. Beth, I had a thought on this. We haven't talked about this. Of something that there's actually 2 meetings that Beth and I were in. And so we'll talk about one meeting that I think went well. So Beth and I sit in a group of some of the analytics leaders all across Merck space, and these are folks inside of technology and research, in manufacturing. Most of the people on these calls have advanced degrees in things that are very, very deep. They're very smart. They're very, very smart. And as we invest in AI talent and data science talent, we try to help to characterize how we're doing, where are some weak points, where are opportunities for us to learn and grow. And so occasionally we'll go in and kind of do a talent story with them to try to help either influence their decision making, maybe allay a concern that they'll have overall. So a series of months ago, we went in, and one of the things that I personally try to encourage with HRBPs too is minimal use of PowerPoint. So PowerPoint is not necessarily a storytelling tool, particularly when we're all moving so quickly. Is it more important to talk about the pattern or the data, or to format a slide? And we think it's probably more about the data and the story that you're trying to tell. So we actually just put up literally the dashboard that we had created for them, and there's certainly best practices to that. And we told the story of what's going on inside of our data science talent and our AI talent for each one of these groups, and they all have different perspectives on all of these different things. But in working through that conversation, we were able to allay several worries that people had, and then introduce other ones for them that were probably more productive, right? So if you focus more here and less here, you're going to do better. One thing that we certainly find, and maybe some of the folks that are participating will have found too, is how many times you're trying to react to an article that was written in the Wall Street Journal or into an industry magazine and so forth. So many times you're also trying to help negate a hypothesis or refocus a hypothesis in there too. So I don't know if Beth, if you agree, but that felt like it was a good use of time and story. So then I thought, okay, so what's a rougher use? The meeting before that with that exact same group. Right. And so it really, it's one of those moments of a similar type of objective of trying to kind of get very different senior stakeholders to either agree to drive action for a specific purpose, or to ensure that they're all on the same page, so that essentially the people on their own teams can make the progress they need to make. Yeah, it didn't work. It didn't work at all. And as I was thoughtful about it, one is I, as the storyteller, didn't have enough time. I didn't have enough time beforehand. I was rushing, which not a technical problem, right? This is not an analytical issue, but as we think about influencing others, which is a lot of times what analytics needs to do, is the storyteller that needs to do that job needs to be an effective vessel at that point. Did you have enough time to prepare? Did you have enough time in the meeting? Right. And so, if it really needs to be a 15-minute conversation, but you have 4, what do you do? Those, Beth, I don't know if you have a thought on that, but like, those are some of the things that kind of come to mind.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we as a company we as an analytics function are doing a much better job of starting conversations with, let's actually ground ourselves in the data, right? Let's not jump to a conclusion. Let's start with data and actually dig in and see what that tells us. I think if I reflected on sort of some mistakes I've made, I've rushed to a point in my head to say, I already know what I want the outcome to be. So now let me go look at the data. And I think where people sometimes make a mistake in storytelling is trying to tell a story and force fit the data. And my advice would be, really ask yourself a question. Look at the data and use the data to help formulate that story, because it does help you communicate that better, and I have a couple of examples where I can think of where, we said, let's go look at some of this data, or let's do some analysis on some of these things, or here's our hypothesis. And it came out completely different. And it actually gave us pause where we said, you know what, maybe that's actually not our story. And so that would be the one piece of advice I would have.
Fantastic. Thank you both. And as I hope our listeners can see and hear all of what we're sharing, I pick up on, okay, you have to make time a priority when it comes to storytelling with analytics. And you also have to be sure and check yourself, question yourself. Am I trying to solve for something I already want the answer or know what the answer is? Or am I opening and expanding my own thinking and looking at the data to drive different answers, different options, and then to explore those with the people that I'm working with? So I think that's really important lessons for us to take away from this. If you did have to share a few other key things that an individual who has to prepare data to tell a story should do, what would those be?
Well, I mean, I think you start early, right? So to kind of before, to Beth's point is, if you're in hypothesis generation or you've got a question, it's at that point, play with the data a little bit. And I think sometimes the problem that the mistake that we can make as analytics professionals is to be too literal. And so if we are still in hypothesis generation, things might wiggle around a little bit. Don't over-engineer the analysis, because you might spend way too much time and then it changes, right? And then you have to spend even more time on the next. So being agile when you're kind of thinking about what's even the problem boundaries that I'm trying to solve? What is the type of problem? What's the minimum or maximum that could even be that you'd even talk about here? What's the population? Some of those basic questions can help influence the decision making, and you can make progress much faster. And also, it's actually more pleasant, I think, for the analyst involved too, so they can do that work. So just a couple thoughts there.
Yep.
Well, and Beth, I'd love to hear your thoughts as not only the person who may be overseeing this team, but also as the person who's in the room listening to the data that's being presented.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Jeremy and I have had lots of conversations around this because sometimes the professionals, which I'm not, by the way, I mean, Jeremy and his team are clearly the experts in this space. They are so good that they sometimes need help of others to sort of say, let's pick our heads up a little bit and ask ourselves what we're trying to do. So I think one of the probably biggest challenges, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just think, in Jeremy and his team have to almost force themselves. They get so deep because they're so good at what they do that listening, if you're in the room, what I sometimes will talk to Jeremy about is, okay, well, what is our takeaways? Like, what are we actually trying? What's the message we want to drive? What is the action we're trying to get at? And then they engage beautifully. But it does take practice, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I guess my piece of advice, and I've been on this journey with Jeremy for a few years now since he's been with Merck, and I learn every time we do something together. I learn something, and so my advice to people would be: don't expect yourself to be perfect or an expert. Get on the journey. Start getting in and start playing with stuff and experimenting, and not everything's going to go great, and then you're going to learn from that, and then it'll be better the next time.
Yeah.
Perfect. So as the storyteller, my takeaways really are, okay, so make sure that you give yourself time to really properly prepare. And as you were talking, Jeremy, all I kept thinking was keep it simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Beth, you also validated that. Don't over-engineer anything. And as the person who's sitting at the table, because I think it's important to see both sides, I'm sitting here thinking, well, also really listen and do not be afraid to ask questions, especially when you may not be certain as to where the conversation is going or when you need more clarity around what's being presented. And that is a great collaboration between the experts like Jeremy and then the individuals that they're supporting throughout the business.
For sure.
Now, Beth and Jeremy, but I'm going to start with Beth with this one. Can you share some cases where analytics has driven a better business outcome?
Yeah. I mean, there's literally so many to choose from, but there's one that sort of sticks out for me. I was actually in a different role. I was the lead HR business partner for our commercial business. And this was back in like 2020, 2021, sort of when that great resignation was happening and companies were feeling the pressure of people leaving in sort of masses. And for those of you that know Merck, you know how important oncology is to us as a business. And I remember I got a call from our CEO, and he was like, "Listen, I'm hearing that we are losing oncology talent like left and right. Like this is a major problem." And I was like, "Okay." And he's like, what are you going to do about it?" And I was like, "Well, let me go away and sort of put my head around this." And so I called my workforce analytics consultant at the time in Jeremy's organization. And I said, "Can you help me think this through? Like like, can we validate if that's even factual first? That's a statement, so the CEO is walking around talking with people, and people are like making these broad sweeping comments like, we're losing oncology talent. We're not paying oncology talent enough. That's why they're leaving, blah, 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 blah." And we have oncology talent that sits in each of our divisions. So in our R&D organization, our manufacturing organization, and our commercial organization. And so with my workforce analytics consultant, we actually put our heads together and we were like, let's actually do some analysis. And we ended up starting small. And as we started to get into it, it got bigger and bigger. And we looked at things like, are we losing people? Is that a true statement? How are we doing from a compensation perspective? We looked at compa ratio. We looked at pulse survey. It's our listening survey scores among oncology talent. We looked at where are they going? Are they leaving, and where are they going? Where are we getting oncology talent from? And so it was one of those things that started off with a really small question that actually snowballed. It got so robust. And we actually ended up taking it to the other divisions so that we could go back and show our executive team, a holistic review of our oncology talent across the entire company. And we did find stuff, right? So, by the way, wasn't actually a true statement that we were losing oncology talent left and right. In fact, what we were able to show them was that we were losing people at the same rate that we were bringing people on. And literally, we looked at another company that we were losing talent to. And I don't remember the exact number, but let's just say we lost 50 people to that company. We actually hired 50 people from that company. So it was a product of more of the external environment, not the fact that we were doing something internally that was causing attrition in our organization. But we also found there were pockets where we had some compensation issues, and we were able to address those. And it got so popular that we actually took that model then and used it in another part of the organization, in our vaccines organization, and replicated the work to be able to really, from a holistic talent perspective, get a handle on what was happening in the workforce. So it was a great outcome.
Wonderful.
You know, Beth,
Yeah.
on that note too. So one of the interesting things about, I've never heard you talk about it like that. That was pretty cool. One of the tools, if I recall correctly, that we used in that analysis is not something that requires a lot of infrastructure. So it's not an endorsement, but it's still a good tool. Is LinkedIn Talent Insights does provide enough kind of real-time external data that you can get a good feel for patterns. And it's been a big departure over these past, let's say, even 3 or 4 years, that we used to talk about what is the benchmark, and you'd get this benchmark once a year from a provider where they would ask a survey to a bunch of HR people, and you would have to believe what's in the survey. Well, there are multiple organizations now. LinkedIn's one of them, but there's 5 or 6 that are really reliable and good, where you can get great real-time data to be able to answer questions like this, and you don't need robust systems internally to be able. You just need to know how to use it and how to tweak it in order to get a better outcome. So that's one of the things that really is exciting for us, is how the overall market has evolved in a way where these types of questions you can answer even more robustly and quickly.
It's great.
Fantastic. Yeah. The resources, the tools that are continuing to pop up that we can use and that can generate the answers that we're looking for are really wonderful. I'm going to just take a quick break here. I'm going to pass it over to Chris. Chris, do we have any questions from our viewers?
Yeah, here's a good one that's related to what Beth was talking about just a minute ago. So Krupa chimes in and asks, or says, we are capturing data on the TA side, talent acquisition, presumably. How do you influence the other side after onboarding to capture data to tell the story of our employees so that you can better understand attrition rates and so on, right? So it sounds like it's maybe a siloization issue or something, but any recommended course of action for when this is going on?
Yeah, and Jeremy, I'm sure, has thoughts on this as well, but maybe I'll start with a real life, in the moment project that we're actually working on right now that addresses that. And that is, we use Workday as our employee record system, and there are lots of different tenants within Workday. And we are right now having a conversation around kind of a term that we're using is talent intelligence, which is, when we hire people, how do we then continue to have information or gain information about our workforce, the skills, the experiences, the capabilities that they have? Because then that allows us to be better informed, gain better insights into our talent, to then be able to either help them focus on their development, redeploy them to highest business needs, think about reskilling them or skilling in different areas. And so literally this week, we've had conversations around how can we start to utilize systems like Workday, and there's a tenant within Workday called Career Hub, where we want employees to be incentivized to continue to update their own skills and capabilities and experiences so that we as a company have better talent intelligence. And through groups like Jeremy's, can use that data to gain meaningful insights to be able to help us solve, quite frankly, better business challenges. So it's a journey. We've not cracked the code by any means. By the way, I don't think any company has.
Totally.
And so I think, the motto that I keep saying to my fellow HR leadership team members is, we got to get on the journey, right? If you wait to try and solve every issue, technology is moving so quickly that you can't possibly keep up. So get on the journey and then evolve as the technology is evolving. And, I think Jeremy's team has done a really nice job of that. I don't know, Jeremy, you want to add anything else?
Yeah, thank you for that too. I mean, I kind of feel like the most important message is make forward progress. Do something that's going to help that. So we'll pick on Workday for this one, but Workday, if you have skills turned on, there is a tool that's called Find Worker. It's actually one of my favorite tools inside of Workday. And some people use it, but it's actually not like the number one tool. But because Workday's Skills Cloud does operate across all clients, there's a lot of terms that people are using inside of this Skills Cloud. You can search your employees by an amazing number of criteria and at least get some answers. So this was a last year, someone came to me and said, hey, look, we need to understand anyone that's come from strategy consulting firms and what jobs they're working on inside of the organization. That's not a report. We went into that Find Worker tool just to see, I don't know, let's take a look to see. There was over 100. And they were all over the organization. They weren't just in one place. And I do really credit us turning on things early and then experimenting, testing and learning. Okay, this is helpful. We can learn something next from this. So you can think about this in terms of big strategy, but also kind of lowercase s strategy too. So kind of think in both minds there.
Hey, I've got one more question if you have an appetite for it. Carol checks in and asks, can you speak about the effort involved in ensuring the integrity and to what Jeremy was just speaking about, the usability of certain data sources? A little bit of a side quest, but I thought I would kick that over to either you, Beth, or Jeremy. Who wants that one?
Jeremy, you want to start?
No one loves the phrase data governance. It is, but it's also a lot less scary today than it has been in the past. I mean, so many great systems are now in place. Like your HRMS, if well managed, can normalize and kind of smooth out a lot of data. Now, if you happen to be an organization with a lot of M&A, if you happen to be an organization where kind of things have been cobbled together over time, there might be some activities you need to look at to just kind of fix up the data so that dates are all the right format. So there's some low-level things that can get looked at there. I will say though, depending on your application, some of the new tools, even inside of a generative AI framework, can actually overcome ugliness, sloppiness, kind of not normal data, because you can kind of convince the AI to do some of the to make some assumptions for you on the analysis side too. So depending on what you're trying to do, like if you're trying to conduct an M&A transaction, that data better be clean, right? You need to if you're going to spin out an organization or so forth, that's a different level of data governance. If you're just looking to analyze something and get a decent directional spin, look at what you have right now, do some minor cleanups in a few different areas, and just find me on LinkedIn. I'll send you a link for some external data governance ideas.
Hey, Jeremy, would you agree though?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the probably most important things is trying to declare from a guidance perspective or a principal perspective, sort of systems of record, right? When we moved to Workday, right? When we moved to Workday, which I think was in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, we took that opportunity that Jeremy was just describing to sort of clean up and get it as clean as possible. And we have declared as a company, it is our system of record. Now, Workday flows to, I think it's hundreds of other systems in the organization. But when you can get that buy-in from the beginning that you try and cull that down, it is a huge step forward in the
Yeah.
data governance journey.
It's, I mean, Beth, like there's a huge thank you note that the analytics team needs to write to that one meeting where everyone declared that, because it simplifies so many different areas of kind of knowing where the data is really coming from.
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so continuing, Beth, this is a question for you. How is Merck thinking about analytical talent themselves?
Yeah, this is a great question. We are a healthcare company, and so some people would say, "Oh, well, do you not have a large analytical workforce?" We actually do, and Jeremy referenced it earlier in his comments, and it's very dispersed. So we have your traditional IT organization that's got a large component of people that are working in an analytical capacity, but in every single piece of our business, the commercial piece, the R&D piece, the manufacturing piece, they have very large groups of people who are focused for that particular area of the business. And so a couple of years ago, I can't remember how many, they seem to sort of run together, but the company said, look, we see where the world is going. We know that digital data and analytics is going to become an even more critical part of our business strategy. And so we better try and think about the talent in that space. Do we have the right capabilities today? What capabilities might we need in the future? Are we going to be able to attract those capabilities? So many people, and this might be a very general comment, so Jeremy will correct me, but one of the questions we were grappling with was, are we going to be able to attract that level of talent? Because there are other industries that, quite frankly, are more appealing to that talent than coming to healthcare or pharma. And so we went on this journey. We got really diligent about it. We spent over a year doing a couple of things. The first thing we did was we started at ground zero, and we actually looked at our job architecture for that type of talent. So we have so many levels in the organization. We apply that across the organization. We actually said, let's throw that out. Let's actually think about this particular type of talent and what we believe we're going to need in the future. And we created their own job architecture for them, which was complicated because when you're trying to do it in a single organization, quite frankly, it's easier. But when you're trying to go to all these different organizations and say, we're going to take your analytics group or your group of people who are focused in this area, and we're going to create a job architecture for them, it was very time intensive, but very time well spent. Once we had the job architecture, we actually mapped. We have over 6,000, I think now, employees around the world who are labeled in a digital data and analytics type of job architecture. So we mapped them all in there. We then did a comp study and said, now that we've got this job architecture, we need to define what are the right salary ranges for that type of talent. And then that flowed into everything else, like how are we going to attract this talent? So we had a whole work stream through our talent acquisition team focused on, do we need to go to these talent differently? How do we engage with this talent? That was the external piece. And then internally, we had a whole work stream, which Jeremy was intimately involved with, in thinking about how are we going to nurture this talent? Once we get them, how are we going to keep them? And how are we going? And now what we found is that the work that they're working on is really, really important to them. And so we felt like we had that. That's a good hook. But it's even things like creating a community of practice across these different divisions where these people can engage with each other and learn from each other about the work that they're working on. It's creating, we have something called Digital U. We've created a learning environment where this type of talent can now actually go and continue to skill up in areas so that they keep their skills fresh and that they're working on skill development that is most relevant for the company. So it's a multi-prong approach. It's been several years. We're not done. But I think we've done a really nice job saying we need to take the care and feeding of these types of talents
Yeah.
really seriously, because we understand how critical they are going to be to the company moving forward.
Yeah.
I don't know, Jeremy, if you have anything else you want.
The I totally agree with everything that you said there, and I would just add in, actually, so the analytics guy is going to say something about empathy, which is this group of talent, data scientist, data engineer, ML engineering, AI engineering, are probably under some of the highest pressures because of the external change involved in what they're doing, where so many greatly talented folks might start getting burnt out. In fact, they do. I mean, it is so intense that, I mean, someone on my team mentioned last year that they were spending 3 hours a night just catching up, even using tools like using AI tools to condense it. 3 hours a night, because so many things had changed in the day that if they didn't, they couldn't keep up with what's going on outside. So what is it that we can do inside of HR? We can reach out to that talent, ensure that the managers that are working with those folks are aware of this. Managing cutting edge research, which we do in Whole, right, requires excellent leadership. We have to have great judgment on how people should use their time, empower people to do things in a way that's going to actually help the organization and them grow at the same time, because they are typically aligned in those ways as well. So what I feel like we've done a nice job on is we've built the infrastructure that Beth has described, and we're really trying to push and encourage and make sure that managers and leaders know how to work with the tools. Things that I heard 2 years ago, like, my manager really doesn't understand. I am an analytics person, but I specialize in text analytics, and they put me on they put me on this other project. I know nothing about it. I'm sure that still happens in some cases, but that noise has gone way, way down. Leaders really understand more about what talent to even put on what projects. That, I think, is absolutely huge. And that's a skill, right? That's a management skill.
Absolutely. So much that we can learn from you and from the architecture that Beth described that Merck is doing, not just on how to grow and develop analytical talent, but also any kind of talent within an organization to keep up with the rapid change that we're experiencing in this external environment, right? So thank you so much for sharing that. Another question that I have that I'm very interested in learning more about is, how are you using analytics to engage with the stakeholders throughout the organization or with your senior leaders?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with this one, and then Jeremy can chime in. This is something I'm so proud of, and I had no hand in actually building it. Jeremy and the team built this completely on their own. But we started having conversations around leadership, and we started saying, what do we expect from leaders, right? And there's always things like we expect leaders to manage their budgets, and we expect them to meet their priorities. But what was missing for us was, what do we want leaders to do in managing their workforce? And so Jeremy and the team created, through Visier, a tool that we call Leader Dashboard. And we've deployed this Leader Dashboard to, I think it's roughly about 600 people, sort of top of the house. So we started with our top 200 leaders. And then last year, we deployed it further out to leaders who had significant organizations in size. And this dashboard literally becomes a lifeline for me. I use it all the time. And so it shows you what your turnover is. It shows you how many open positions you have. It shows you what your recent listening survey scores are, and how it compares to the company, and how you did on that. You can look at things like we call our talent framework, our talent growth framework, where you put in someone's sort of potential and how you're thinking about their potential. You can see the makeup of your organization in that. We've just added in our recognition program, where you can now see the types of recognition that you're using and how much you're spending on that recognition. So it is meant to be a completely holistic view of all the things that, as a leader, you should be thinking about when you're thinking about managing your talent. And the idea was, let's put it at their fingertips. Let's teach them to fish. And so we put it out there. Jeremy and the team ran lots of educational sessions. And as you would suspect, there were leaders who probably are more technology savvy who jumped on and absolutely loved it, and others who are still continuing to figure out how to best use it. But again, when I talked in the beginning about elevating our HR business partners' acumen, this also is elevating leaders' acumen on what are the things that you should be paying attention to, right? Like if your turnover is spiking, should you pause and say, let me take a look at my survey results. Do I have an issue? Can I mitigate that risk, right? You can look at things like, am I moving talent around enough? Am I providing enough opportunity for my talent? And so it's an amazing example of how we're taking data and analytics, because it's almost we're serving it up in a way that allows the leaders to sort of be thoughtful and ask questions. And we're putting it right in front of them every day, anytime they want to look at it. And so I think it's a huge accomplishment for our workforce analytics team.
Well, and Beth, I'll remind you that you actually you participated in the most important component of this, which is, so Beth offered, and we did a roadshow together, she and I, where we spoke to each one of our senior leaders. When we tried to determine what the leader dashboard was, our first users, it included the CEO. And so what we did is we actually asked them and interviewed them to what would make this more relevant to the problems that you're trying to solve today. So many times we'll speak to peers in other organizations, and they ask the question, how do you determine what to put in front of senior leaders? And the answer was, we asked them.
Yeah.
Quite simply, right? And that was really, I mean, we had some hypotheses on what would be helpful, but the same way that you make a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, you then modify based on a result. The same thing is true here as well. And one learning from doing this is that while the data and the analysis really is owned by that leader, it's not our data. We don't own anything that's going on. There's an alternate side, which is I personally never expect a leader to be logging in every day to a tool like this. They should log in when something has really changed, when they need to understand what's going on. They're facilitating a conversation. And so if you kind of think about this as, Beth and I are having a conversation, we're talking about one of our teams, that's 2 points, right? So Beth and I. If there's the leader dashboard or some data, well, now it's a triangle, right? So we get to team up and look at that thing over there, and then debate and enrich the conversation. The intent for things like this is to make that work. Now, one of the things that is a little bit less transparent is we can actually draw a line in between what we show to the outside world, and let's say our impact report for that reports sustainability and ESG and has some human capital data in there, to what the board sees, to what the CEO sees, what managers and leaders see too. You can actually draw that line and see where that all looks as well. So it's one version of the truth that is then broken up by all those areas as well. So that kind of really gets into who is this data for, and how to make it a simpler story.
What a wonderful strategy to really engage your senior leaders and to get even closer to the buy-in that you need in order to make the changes happen within the organization with the use of this data. And way too often, even myself, I sometimes forget about that very important tactic that we all have to remember as HR practitioners. When you want to know how somebody wants something, just ask them. Just ask them how they want it and how they want to see it. And your ability to actually incorporate that into your strategy is very impressive.
Lisa, on that note, one thing that I would observe, we didn't say yes to everything they said.
That's correct.
So just like that, you don't have to say yes to everything. It's actually, it's one of the things I just kind of remembered, like, oh wait, there were some requests that you don't always have to go for it. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I want to pause right here because I do think that Chris has some really wonderful questions from some of our viewers based on what we all just talked about. Chris.
Yeah, very much related to what Jeremy's just been discussing there, and Beth right prior to that. This is going back to the listening tools and reporting to leadership and stakeholders. So Caroline checks in and says, you mentioned engagement survey as a tool. What other employee listening tools do you use to understand the current culture? And how do you share that data with stakeholders? Maybe not so tools focused, but how do you actually report on that data? What does it look like? Because our viewers are curious.
Jeremy?
Yeah. So we use Glint, by the way. That's our tool set. It's now owned by Microsoft. So in terms of actually transparency, we try to be as transparent as possible with employees. But there are versions of this that are public. You can go to our website. You can actually see some of the results. The board sees similar data. Senior leadership sees data, and our employees and managers see data as well. One of the more important things that I feel is timeliness of seeing the results is incredibly important. And so, you know, in an old world, you would run a survey and in 6 weeks, managers would see the results. In the world today, I mean, technically there are some projects that we do that you turn off the survey and people see the results right away. And for things that actually scale, so we run a survey once or twice a year that's kind of on a larger scale. And for that, the managers that see that, it's just a few days in between the survey close and they get to see the information. Focusing which types of questions are important for which decision makers is a critical differentiator. So if you're asking very, very big swing questions that really only the CEO or a senior leadership team can answer, but you're empowering managers to try to make a change on something that really has never been their decision, it's not as empowering. So it's also good to ask the question, who is this for? And try to help align the types of questions you're asking with the feedback that you need at all the different levels. One of the great hacks, by the way, right now is, as long as you're using the appropriate version of OpenAI or some type of generative tool, comment summarization, fantastic right now. It is a wonderful time to try to understand the deeper themes in comments because you can summarize them so easily now.
And I would add, Jeremy, right? I mean, I think one of the real progressive things that we did was not only cut that time down, which was time to close the survey to the time when the managers had access, but we actually gave managers access. And so they actually have the ability to go in and through now summarize comments, themes, scores. And so we're really making it, frankly, very easy for managers to say, here's what my organization is telling me.
I've got one more question. Thank you for that. This one's from Carol. Carol and Caroline are showing up strong on this show.
Thank you, Carol and Caroline.
Yeah, they're nailing it. Great to hear that you've developed out the data discipline within your organization. Have you upskilled non-data folks to achieve greater data literacy within the organization? I like this question. What do you think about that one? Who wants it?
You know, I kind of feel, Beth, tell me what you think about this. So one, data folks is always interesting to me. I think more times than not, if you're working someplace, non-for-profits, we're using data in some degrees. But, you know, as I talk to friends and peers in different organizations, let's just work with HR for a second, it's a pretty consistent pattern that about a third of the folks are early adopters. No matter what the topic is, they're gonna go after it. About a third, if you ask them to use tooling, they'll use tooling. They're open to that. And a third are on the journey, right? And when I hear a question like that, I almost kind of start to segment the audience into, am I talking about the early adopters? Am I talking about folks that are open to it, or folks that are on the journey, and then answer the question and then try to figure out, okay, so where is that going? I mean, I feel like many parts of HR are the earliest adopters of data-driven technologies. And I think talent acquisition is key amongst them. And HR is also the first to beat themselves up for not thinking they're data-driven. So if you're in talent acquisition and you are using even some of the LinkedIn tooling for a recruiter, like the recruiter, that's using pretty advanced matching algorithms to try to understand and find patterns inside of it. But then they'll say they're not a data person, and I challenge that. I challenge that. I think that a lot of this is, of course, there's a skill component to it, but it's a mindset component.
Yeah.
Is if they believe that they are capable of this, they will be, because this is all learnable stuff. So I actually don't think the blocker on that journey, on the journey team, is anything, is more than that. The skills for the vast majority are attainable.
Yeah, totally agree. I was listening to the question and I was thinking about it through the lens of an HR business partner, because I will say that I know what happens sometimes as an HR business partner is you go out and you're engaging with business leaders,
Yeah.
and they've already determined what they want to do. And so as an HR business partner, part of your role is to influence, coach, and advise. And they do sometimes struggle with that, but both HR BPs and business leaders. And my advice is start small by just using data to have a conversation, right? You know, put data in front of them and say, hey, I know you're thinking about doing this, this, and this. Let me show you some data. I went and I pulled some data. Let's just talk about this. And my experience has been, when you start to put objective information in front of people, they then start to get on that change journey with you. You know, there could be, I'm not declaring it is, but there could be a generational component to this as well. And I think as the workforce, you know, have 4 generations now, as they move and you start to see, you know, Gen Xers and Ys and Zs kind of come up into leadership positions, I personally am seeing a difference in their willingness to engage with technology in a different way. And that could be a huge stereotype, so take it with a grain of salt. But I do think starting with simple conversations around, let's talk about what I've observed through the lens of data, helps to move the conversation along.
Yeah, that's great.
And thank you both, Jeremy and Beth. That's a great segue into our last and final question before I hand it back over to Chris, which is, as we think about the future, where do we believe analytics may go next, especially the advances in technology that we're seeing that are happening at such a rapid pace?
Jeremy, why don't you start? I have a point of view.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple things. One is, we should all have a plan. We should all have a vision of the future. We're writing our latest white paper on where we think everything needs to go internally, and be prepared to pivot in short order. So, you know, it used to be that you would set plans for the future once every, 36 months and be fine. Yeah, it's about twice a year now, right? So they're just caveating by that. You know, the advent of the use of generative AI, it can be exploded in lots of different ways, and all vendors are emailing you probably twice a day on the same thing. Like it can get a little bit out of hand. But here's the one thing that I kind of feel like is becoming more and more exciting is we are gonna be able to talk to systems more than use systems, and that is a huge change when it comes to analytics. Right. And so if I can ask a tool like Visier or Power Apps or Power BI a question on Teams or Slack or something and get an answer back, that is a new era for us inside of the organization. Now, for analytics teams, I think many of you that are on are probably engaged in analytics in some way. You're probably going to get more involved in some of the AI work, because one, you actually have a common language. You understand how it operates. It can help to build the strategies that will unlock power inside of it. There's a third part for analytics that I think is really important, which is you also have the skill set to validate how some of the new tools that we're getting pitched work, right? And in doing that, we can help to ask questions about bias. We can ask questions about functionality, so we can take the best advantage of some of these things. But like in the future, my hope is that we'll be able to use AI, and I mean this in the broadest context, right? Not just inside of our company, but wouldn't it be nice if everyone had a data-driven talent coach on their phone, right? And so, well, Betty, you're about to meet with Betty Joe, and the last time that you had this meeting, Here's three things that you discussed, and here's some hot buttons that you might want to think about next. How amazing is that? And like, is that far off in our future? I mean, we're hearing about early attempts right now of folks that are getting there. That's why that reinvention and pivoting becomes so important. Is sink in, do great work, and listen hard, because it might change in a flash.
I'm not sure I have anything to add to that. That was beautiful.
I have to share, you blew my mind with one statement, which was that statement of that talk to systems rather than use systems, which in my head, I'm thinking it is a true partnership, not just tools and resources. We are now partnering with systems and data and able to ask them questions where we get answers generated, which gets us thinking differently as well. So it's a great collaboration, and one definitely that's here to stay and will only advance as we continue to move forward in the future. Okay, Chris.
Okay, good. Thank you, Lisa. I want to thank you, Lisa. Cornell's Lisa Sensis. We had Beth Perrone and Jeremy Shapiro from Merck and Company joining us for Cornell keynotes today. Great energy, super useful tips and strategies. Your seasoned insights are very much appreciated. And I, of course, want to thank our viewers as well. Great questions, Carol, Caroline Krupa, etc. We had several that we didn't get to. For those of you who have not checked out the Cornell Keynotes podcast, we'll drop a URL in the chat so you can check it out for some weekend listening. Know that this episode will be up in just a couple weeks. So heads up for that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Beth, Jeremy, and Lisa for joining us. And I want to thank our audience once again. We'll see you next time on Cornell Keynotes. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.